welcome one and all. It's time. Age of Sigmar, 4th edition. Is it too early to say it's in full swing? Probably, because this is maybe the world's first Age of Sigmar 4th edition event. Full rules are out, points are out, everything's out, and it's time to start rolling dice and pushing golden Sigmarite warriors around. This is Age of Sigmar Bootcamp 1 from the TSN Arena that took place this weekend, and I've taken my mighty Stormcast Eternals, 2,000 points, led by the Lord Commander Bastion himself, and let's dive straight in and look at my wonderful assortment of Stormcast Eternals. Now, you don't get a lot for 2,000 points when you take some very expensive units, and let's talk a little bit about the army building and the processes you have to go through that are much simpler actually now. It's much more streamlined than it was previously with the various battalions and whatnot that you could put your units into and then unlock benefits based on that. Now you have regiments, so you'll have a hero as the head of the regiment, and then that'll allow you to take certain units within their regiment. So for example, Bastion can have any Stormcast Eternals units at all in his regiment, whereas other heroes can have maybe units from particular chambers in their regiment. So my first regiment is the General's regiment, and Bastion is the General, and he is joined by 4 concussors. I've been waiting 10 years, and they're actually half decent now. So it's a very expensive unit though, 500 points for 4 of them. They drop down to 5 wounds each in this edition, but a couple of things in their favour. They still do mortal wounds in combat, which is something that has been stripped from certain other units in the game. Mortal wounds are just harder to do in general, especially shooting. They've pretty much got rid of all mortal wound shooting that I've seen so far. There might still be a bit of it around, but not much. Mortal wound spells are not as deadly as they once were either. So less mortal wounds flying about the place, so it's handy that you can dish them out with a unit. And the most important thing, I think, that's been added to the concussors is that they have picked up the raw ability that other units, such as monsters, used to be able to do, but the concussors just have it now. So on a 3+, they can shut down enemy units from using commands, which is quite a big deal, actually, in this game. I haven't seen too much else that shuts down the use of commands. You can get it with one of the endless spells, but I haven't seen a lot of units specifically that can do it. And commands are quite a big deal in this edition. They're not just thrown around willy-nilly like they were before. Speaking of commands not being thrown around willy-nilly, Bastion, he can throw them around the williest of the nilly. He can throw around 1 all-out attack command to a unit wholly within 12 per phase. So he's just loving life at the moment. There's less command points, but he doesn't even have to spend them. So Bastion is just living the dream. His long-range or infinite-range shooting attack has gone. Most of the table-wide abilities seem to have been shortened, particularly shooting ones, and it's just an 18-inch range, decent shooting attack now. It's no longer just going to throw a million dice at Gargants like it used to be. And he doesn't heal quite as much now, Bastion. He only heals 4 wounds instead of his full wounds if he slays a model during the turn. But his shooting is actually much more capable of slaying a model now, so there's quite a decent chance that you'll be able to kill something in a turn. Also in their regiment we have 6 long strikes. So it's a reinforced unit, and long strikes on paper you might think they've got worse. Their shooting range has been drastically reduced from 30 to 18 inches. But the key is that they can move and shoot, they can run and shoot, they can run and shoot and charge, they can retreat and shoot and charge, they can retreat and shoot, they can redeploy in the enemy turn and then covering fire in the enemy turn as well. So there's a lot of things they can do. And redeploy before you use your covering fire is quite a big deal, because the way covering fire works is shooting in the opponent's turn as a reaction, and it has to be against the closest visible enemy unit. So, if the enemy are clever and put something lame near you, so that you're forced to shoot it, being able to redeploy the long strikes and maybe bring another unit in as the closest instead means you can then shoot at that. So that's quite a big deal. It does get expensive in command points, but if you're saving command points by using Bastion for his all-out attack for free ability, then you can afford to spend a couple on the long strikes, because those 6 shots are pretty tasty. They've lost their mortal wounds in shooting, which is obviously a hit, but they have gained +1 rend against heroes. So that includes hero monsters, which are quite common at the moment. So against hero monsters, they're rend 3, which is quite significant. And what else have we got in here? So in the next regiment, we've got the Stardrake on its own. And the Stardrake has definitely got better. It's got more attacks now, and its ability to eat models with its cavernous jaws is quite straightforward. You just roll 3 dice at an enemy unit, and each one that is equal or greater than the enemy's wounds characteristic, that many models just get eaten. Removed from play, no saves at all. So if you're against ogres, and let's say they've got 4 wounds each, a unit of ogres, you roll 3 dice. If you roll 3 4+, 3 of them just die before you even start the combat. You don't even have to have activated yet. You just eat them before combat even starts, like a rampage. So very powerful ability there. The sub-faction I've gone for is the Lightning Echelon, which means that the Extremist Chamber units, which are the Stardrake and the Concussors, on a turn that they make a charge, which would include a counter charge as well, if you manage to pull one of those off, then on a 3-up they get to have strike first in the turn, which is quite a big deal. It means in your own turn you can commit to multiple combats and not worry about the sequencing too much if you've got strike first. And if you're on the enemy turn, it's a big deal, because normally you have to go second. I've also given the Stardrake the Quicksilver Draft, which means that you can just choose to go first as well, which is useful for when you're not charging, and sometimes the enemy will make a long charge into you before you get a chance to hit them, so good for keeping the Stardrake safe. It doesn't have any kind of ward save though. The only ward save in the whole list is Bastion, who has 5+, so potentially vulnerable. We've also got in separate regiments, because at the time I didn't feel like looking up which heroes could go in each other's regiments. So to keep it simple, I just took another regiment with the Knight Incantor, and this is her final farewell tour for the next 12 months, because she is disappearing, along with the other units in her chamber, the Sacrosanct Chamber. Basically all the 2nd edition Stormcast. So Knight Incantor still has an auto unbind, and she also has a pretty powerful ability where she can put -1 onto casting endless spells and manifestations and such to the enemy, which is quite tasty. And the Lord Veritant, who is a priest but also has an unbind ability, which is quite useful, and he is useful now, because before I think he was too expensive and just wasn't as good as the Lord Relictor, but now he can have all the same prayers as the Lord Relictor and an unbind. So when there's lots of spells being thrown around, you want those extra unbind abilities. He also, if he gets close enough, puts -1 onto spellcasting and prayers for the enemy as well. And his little token, which is now a Griff Crow, which I think is actually smaller than this model now on the new one that they put in the Scaventide starter box, the new Lord Veritant. If he fails an armor save by rolling a 1, his token goes away, so he loses one of his anti-spell abilities, which is a bit lame. Then 5 Vanquishers with him, and they get extra damage against units of 5 or more models, and they have extra rend against infantry. So good against big infantry hordes. That's what they're doing in the list, because the rest of the army is quite elite damage. And then for endless spells, I've taken the Purple Sun as an option, because it's the only one of that spell lore that I actually have painted, and it looks quite good. It reduces armor saves and can do mortal wounds when it's moving into things, and it can charge and get in combat as well, which is quite cool. So, in this edition, before we go on too far with the video, a couple of things, big things that have changed, are that interruptions of the turn are now very predictably sequenced. So for example, the way redeploy used to work is that you would have to keep an eye out for whenever someone moved within 9 inches, and then you would have to say, right, I'm going to redeploy, because you would miss your chance. And you have to be careful not to tow into 9 inches of the enemy if you didn't want them to redeploy. Whereas now, you just do all your moves, your opponent barely even has to look at the table, and after you've done all your moves, you then ask your opponent, would you like to redeploy? And then they can redeploy a unit. You don't have to do anything to trigger it, it's just very simple and straightforward. Same in the shooting phase, you do all your shooting, and then you ask your opponent, would you like to use covering fire? And then they do their reaction. And then in the charge phase, you do all your charges, and then ask your opponent, would you like to do a counter charge? So it's very easy, and when you're in the hero phase as well, you do all your stuff, and then your opponent can do their counter spells. So I very much like that. Even though there's technically more interruptions of the opponent's turn, you would think that would make it more complicated, but it's all incredibly consistent in when it happens. So it's very easy to get used to, and it flows very smoothly, despite the interruptions. Combat still works the same way, which is you select one unit, then your opponent does, and you alternate like that. So we've got some more nice pictures of my faction here. Close up of the purple sun. Some of these pictures were harvested from the TSN event chat. That I didn't personally take all the photos, but there's Lord Bastion himself, who is cheap enough to warrant use, I would say now. There aren't a lot of ways to get free commands. Mighty Stardrake now competitive, potentially. And the first mission is Border War. And I've got all the mission cards out in my hand here, because my copy of Skaven Tide arrived on the Saturday, so I was able to take my mission cards along on the Sunday. So these were just my opponent's cards, I think. So I've got Border War here, and you can see the terrain layout on this side of the card, which is a nice thing they've done now. On one side you get the terrain, other side you get the rules. So the way this mission works is that you score 1 victory point for holding your home objective. So if you're the blue, it's there. You score 2 victory points for each of the objectives you hold on the centre line. And you score 5 if you control the enemy's home objective. Then 4 for a battle tactic. So every turn, in every mission, you can score 10 points. 4 of those for battle tactic, and you're limited to 6 for objective scoring. So you don't need to be on all 4 objectives. If you're on both home objectives, you get 1 for your own, 5 for the enemy. That's already the maximum. You don't also need to be on the other 2. The reason you might want to be on all the objectives is so when it comes to your opponent turn, maybe they have more trouble scoring because you're on them and they would have to remove your models from the objective or get more value or more control score onto those objectives to take them off you. And the twist, every mission has a twist now as well. So if you're the underdog, meaning if you are behind on the scores going into the battle round, then in this one, add 1 to hit rolls for units in the underdog's army if they charge this turn and are contesting the objective wholly within their enemy territory. So if you're behind and you make a big play for the enemy's home objective, then you get rewarded for that. So that's pretty cool. And what am I up against? It is Slaves to Darkness, the evil, vile forces of chaos. So you can see immediately I don't have much stuff on the table. And you may also notice that the objectives are smaller in this edition than they were in the last one. Considerably smaller, so you have to be a lot closer to them to contest them. We've got the Lord Veritant on the table for some unbinding ability. Oh, I should tell you, the Knight Incanter, I've given her the Staunch Defender trait, which means that when she is on an objective, friendly units on that objective add 3 to their control score. So if each one of these models is worth 1, then they would then gain another 3 on top of that. Also, this unit has a banner, so that gives you a +1 as well. So for just 5 models, this unit would actually be worth 9 control score. And then the Stardrake out on the other flank. So we have got Chaos Knights. We have got a unit of 6 Varangard. We have got Furies. We have got Be'lakor. We have got Abraxia, who sounds to me like a cleaning product. And then we've got more Chaos Knights. So, that is a really deadly middle combo. There's all kinds of horrible abilities that can go on there. The Varangard, for example, can have a fight twice ability. There's some ways of getting strike first with these as well, which is obviously terrifying. And the one thing they did take out the game is that if a hero has strike first, and they also have a way to make a unit activate immediately after them, then they can't use it unless that unit also has strike first. So you can't strike first with a hero and then pull another unit in to also strike first when they don't have the rule, because there were some very potentially broken combos caused by that. And some really fun ones as well. You may recall that if you're a long-time viewer of the Age of Sigmar content on this channel, the Wood Chipper was a manoeuvre that could be pulled off in one of the seasons of last edition where you could activate a hero with Quicksilver and then he could pull his unit in to fight after him immediately. So, what is my strategy for this game? Well, you can see who's off the table there. I've got the Concussors, Bastion, and the Long Strikes waiting in the wings. So, let's go back to the wide shot and talk about my plan. So, all these Chaos Knights are going to be slightly better on the charge than when they're not charging. the 2 units of actual knights are quite far away from this big blob of death that I would rather just not engage at all unless I feel like I can take it out. That's where all the pain is coming from. So I'm going to specifically hone in and target the Chaos Knights and try and kill them immediately and just get them out of the way. This army has no way of bringing things back to life. I have one way of doing that, which is I can spend a command point to revive a unit that was previously killed in the battle at half strength if it's 2 or more models and it's infantry or cavalry. So the concussors are 500 points. When they die, I can then bring back a 250 point unit for 1 command point, which is a very efficient use of that ability. If I was using it on vanquishers, it would round up and bring back 3, but that's way less than 250 points I'd be bringing back there. So I think concussors are actually the most efficient points use of that ability in the whole army. Okay, so let's see if Operation Kill the Knights works out for me. I get turn 1, which I believe my opponent gave away to me. And it used to be the case that if you were playing Stormcast, you always want to go second, because you want the chance of a double turn so you can drop down, kill something, and then you might fail your charges when you drop down as well, so you get a second bite at it if you get a double turn. Now, having a double turn is not necessarily a good thing, because if you choose to take a double, you can't score a battle tactic during that turn, so you only really want to take the double when you're absolutely certain you're going to wipe out the enemy or slaughter them to such a degree that they can't recover and thus can't score points going forward, because you are going to put yourself at a disadvantage scoring-wise if you take a double voluntarily. So double turns are going to be way less of a thing. It's a very strong deterrent for taking them. So in my turn, you can see I bring down the concussors near these Chaos Knights. Oh, and by the way, this battle tactic means I have to have 2 friendly units that fight this turn and none of them were destroyed. The concussors come down opposite the knights over there. The long strikes drop down in the centre and decide they're going to start shooting the Varangard. Because if I can get them thinned down, that's going to be way less models attacking twice when they get to use that ability. And Bastion is lingering with them as well. Not only to give them a free all-out attack, but also if someone decides they want to charge into the long strikes and they don't drag Bastion into the combat, I can declare a counter charge with him, which would be very short range because the enemy are going to be right here. And then he could then charge in and help out, which would be quite significant. The Stardrake moves up to chase after these Chaos Knights, but unfortunately I fail all my charges in the first round. You can see these Chaos Knights redeployed away, and obviously we're all learning at this stage. So if you pick that battle tactic that you have to have 2 units in combat, you want to actually make your charges. You can see Bastion came down 9 inches away from there as well. So after he'd handed out his all-out attack there, and I'd failed with the concussors, then Bastion could have also made a charge in there, which would have been nice if I'd made that, but instead he's going to stay here and look for counter charges. So I failed the battle tactic, but I do score 3 for holding my home objective and for holding this one. I don't feel like I could have gone big onto all the objectives. I don't have enough units to spread out. I'm just going to protect my home objective and try and score a bit later. My main focus now is to kill these 2 units of Chaos Knights, which obviously didn't work immediately. And my opponent decides to choose a battle tactic that is kill these long strikes, which is why there's a zoomed in picture of them. Chaos Knights are steaming in. The Varangard are steaming in as well. The other Chaos Knights and the Furies are moving on to this objective. Bellicor and Abraxia are hanging out there as well, ready to charge in, or attempt to. So, let's see if they make their charges. The Varangard and the Chaos Knights do make their charges. However, importantly, Bellicor and Abraxia do not make their charges, so there is a chance we could survive here, as slim as it may be. And I think we're about to get to combat now. Yep, all long strikes get killed, which is very sad. So, in that turn, I did actually use a counter shoot with the long strikes, but if we go back here, you'll see that the Chaos Knights intentionally made themselves the closest unit, so that I had to counter fire against them, covering fire, rather than the Varangard. And I could have redeployed, but I don't think I had enough command points left at this stage to do that, because I was also eyeing up potentially a counter charge. Because if I didn't have enough points for a counter charge, then they could not charge and they could just let the Varangard go into the long strikes and not worry about fighting Bastion at all, and knowing that I didn't have any points to counter charge with him. So I wanted to save the points to make sure Bastion gets to fight. So the long strikes do get killed, sadly. And then Bastion whomps a few of the enemy successfully, but then he gets killed. Oh no. So not the greatest of starts, and my opponent scores a big 9 in the first round. So, into the second round, and I go for Slay the Entourage, which is kill a unit in the enemy general's regiment, which I think may have been the Varangard. So the Stardrake steams in there, kills loads of them, but the Varangard actually do a good job surviving. The Lord Veritant teleports himself with translocation up into the top corner there, ready to score some battle tactics later on, because there are some location-based ones. By the way, I've just spotted that we do have John in the chat there. If anyone else is watching this, feel free to comment along if you spot anything, or if you've got any ideas. And you'll also see that because the long strikes are dead, I decide not to wait to see if the concussors die to get best value out of the bring back a unit ability. I decide to just use it immediately to bring back 3 long strikes so I can try and turn the tide here. So it brings back a unit at half strength, and they immediately start shooting and put some wounds onto Abraxia, who's down to 6 wounds. My concussors make it into the Chaos Knights on this side and should completely wipe the floor with them. The Vanquishers are under threat from this unit. So I think I was in combat with them, and they have an ability which means they can just leave combat and do a normal move to flap away. So they've done so to get to safety. And the Stardrake does actually manage to finish off the Varangard, which is good. There's 1 Chaos Knight remaining. And the Stardrake's ability to eat units, to eat models of a certain wound characteristic came into play here, because you'll remember there were 4 Chaos Knights there at the start. And suddenly there was only 1. That's because the Stardrake just rolls 3 dice, and then if you equal or beat the wound characteristic of the unit you're fighting, you just eat that many models into its cavernous jaws. So the Stardrake opened its mouth, and 3 Chaos Knights just happily strolled into its mouth and got eaten. So very powerful there, and then it is able to kill the Varangard with its abilities, which is great because that was the battle tactic to kill the Varangard. We've got Greg in the chat, who is totally clueless and has played a lot of the old world, first exposure to AoS. Well, I would say now is a good time to jump on AoS because this new edition flows very smoothly for my liking. A lot of the problems I had with the previous edition are gone. Some of them are still there. There's a lot of unit resurrection and healing abilities, which in general in games, I think I've gone on record as saying that I think any healing mechanic or resurrection or recursion as they call it, I think all of those are bad game design decisions because they make the games last longer and they feel bad mechanics, which means that it's the amount of joy that you bring to one player for resurrecting a unit is far outweighed by the amount of anguish that you cause on their opponent because you're just reversing their good work. An armor save is a little bit in that direction. That's a mild feel bad mechanic because you're kind of undoing their good work, but I'd say that's about the limit. Healing, you're actually reversing the cool thing that your opponent has done. So I think that counts as a feel bad mechanic, which I'm generally opposed to in gaming, but it's very frequently used in tabletop games, so just have to deal with it. Some armies in AoS 4 can certainly bring back a lot of units to life. Skaven are one. Often they'll bring them back at half strength and only once, so it's not an infinite pool that you're drawing from. Greg says, sounds like Malifaux summoning masters, especially in second ed where you get more and more points of models on the board. Kind of. You're limited in what you can bring back in Age of Sigmar. And often it'll be tied to faction terrain as well, which you can shut down if you destroy terrain, which you can do much more easily than you could in the past. So you can counter it, it's not just unstoppable. You can see that the concussors wipe the floor with the Chaos Knights over there, and just like that, the forces of Chaos are down to 1 heavily wounded Abraxia, Be'lakor, and a single Chaos Knight, and the Furies, which aren't very scary. You'll also see that the Knight Incantor cast the -1 charge dice spell, which is Starfall, cast that illegally onto Be'lakor, because I found out later by reading the entire rule that you can only cast that onto infantry and cavalry. So it doesn't make too much of a difference here because he's in the middle of nowhere, and then I think we realise in the next turn actually that he shouldn't have had that spell cast on him. So my opponent in their turn is going for Take Their Land, which is a battle tactic to take a piece of terrain that's in your opponent's territory, and this one is chosen. So I could try and deny it if we go back and look at this. So the concussors potentially could redeploy far enough to get onto this terrain, but if they get charged, then they obviously could get eaten, which means that they wouldn't be able to contest anything. You'll also notice this token here. This is Chaos have defiled the objective, which means that anyone contesting it from my side will take mortal wounds at the end of the turn. At the end of the Chaos turn, I think. So that's just horrible. Befouling an objective like that. So, yeah, there we go. Thumbs down because, yeah, I realise I'm not allowed to use that, so we take away that debuff. So Be'lakor is free to go and run wild. Abraxia is going after the Stardrake, who can't run away because the Chaos Knight is there, holding it in combat. And Be'lakor is going after the concussors. Abraxia charges into the Stardrake. Be'lakor gets into the concussors. However, the Stardrake has Quicksilver and is able to strike first against Abraxia and just eats her. Is it Abraxia a woman? I think it is. I think that model is. And just gets eaten. So the Stardrake is doing amazing work here and kills the other Chaos Knight as well. Be'lakor, you can see, has taken some wounds in the battle here and hasn't killed any of the concussors. One of them is down to a wound, but yeah, it's basically game over now because it's just a really wounded Be'lakor left and some Furies. So my opponent is able to score a battle tactic though and score some points, but that's pretty much going to be the last they're able to score now. So I want to take this piece of land, which was a reason for teleporting my Lord Veritant over there in the previous turn to set it up, because if you're relying on the turn that you're doing the prayer, then there's a chance it could fail. So if you teleport to where you want to be for next turn, so it rewards planning ahead for your battle tactics, because most teleportation abilities in this game can fail, so you don't want to be relying on it. And obviously I just gun down Be'lakor with everything. Stardrake's got a decent shooting attack, long strike's obviously good, and the Furies are still up, but that's it. So I'm scoring big and there's no way my opponent can stop me now. The Furies take some wounds with a covering fire ability on their own turn and can't really do anything, and then I just kill them. Taking the flanks, which is to put a unit on each battlefield edge, and they have to be not wholly within your own territory. So you have to be a little bit out of your territory and you have to be on the flanks, on the two short edges, and you can't have been set up this turn, which means no teleporting. So that's another one you have to set up in advance. So if you look, I had the Lord Veritant over on this side who can just auto-run there, and the concussors can just nip over there to get to the short edge. And then I'm able to shoot down the last Furies, and that's the end of the game. So a dominant win for the Stormcast, despite losing 6 long strikes and Bastion immediately, and failing my first turn battle tactic. The Chaos stuff just crumbled. Once the Stardrake got in there and the concussors, they just whooped everything. And getting to shut down commands with the concussors is a big deal. I think that's a very powerful ability right now. And having one of these units strike first as well when they charge is also a big deal, because then if you're charging in with both of them and the concussors roll a 3+ to strike first, that means you pick them to go first, they kill something, and then you move into the normal sequence. So I'd start with the Stardrake. So both my units get to attack because one of them has strike first before the enemy hits back. So I'm liking this little combo here. I do have a million Stormcast units though, so I'm not going to run the same army every time. I'm going to try out all the different combos that I can come up with. So, yep, I just keep scoring points. Nothing my opponent can do, and then the final round, since there's nothing left, I can just put a unit on each table quarter away from the enemy to score again. So there you go, big win for the Stormcast in the first round, and we're feeling pretty good. But, next, we're up against Cities of Sigmar, who are quite terrifying because there's a lot of shooting opposite me here. An awful lot of shooting. There's a really big unit of Fusiliers. There's some Cavaliers. There are some cannons. It's quite terrifying. And the reason that... Let's see, who have I got on the table? I've got... I think it's the same combo as last time. The mission, by the way, I don't think we had a card for this one, so I can just tell you which one it is. Let's see if I can find it here. It may well be the could be the Jaws of Galette, this one. And that one is that if you're the underdog, from the second battle round on, at the end of their turn, the player can remove one objective from play. Which is quite cool because you're going to slowly run out of objectives if the underdog decides, you know what, my opponent is too bedded in on that objective, I'm just going to delete it so they can't use it anymore. That's quite cool. And other than that, you score points for having one objective, you score points for having two, and you score points for having more than your opponent. So, we've got Tom in the chat. Good evening. We're on to game 2 after a crushing win from the Stormcast up against Cities of Sigmar. And this game is actually against one of the renowned high-level Age of Sigmar players. The events at the TSN Arena are a mixed bag of player experience and ability. You do get some of the ultra top-tier players there in their team uniforms and everything, and then you also get some people that are just coming to their first ever event. So it's a really cool atmosphere. Mixed experience players. So obviously as the weekend goes on, you probably find yourself gravitating on the rankings closer to the players at your skill level by the end of the day, and then into day 2. So am I sailing too high? We'll find out. So the Cities of Sigmar, what do they have going for them right now? Well, they have a couple of really cool things that they have going for them, which are they can do double commands, which is a big deal, because that means that some things that are usually limited to 1, most commands are limited to, you can issue it to 1 unit per turn, they can just give it to 2. So things like covering fire, where you let 1 unit shoot in your opponent's turn, another unit can also do it for free. So you still only... oh no, actually that's a lie. I think they both have to spend a point. I think that's right. So it's worth it though to fire twice in your opponent's turn. I think that's right. I think you have to pay for both. But they also have just abilities that can be passed on to units with the heroes. And I think that's pretty cool and thematic actually. When you look at Cities of Sigmar, that seems like it's how they should work. They should have these heroes that are in amongst the very organised army, issuing them commands and giving them very specific instructions for something they should be doing at that point in the battle. You also think they should be quite weak because they're mostly just humans, but with the potential to be very organised. And I don't know if it's easy to translate that on the table. If there was like a leadership mechanic in this game, you would imagine they would be very high for being so organised, but that's not something that's in the game. So the way they've represented it is that they just hit quite hard. And their saves aren't too horribly bad either. So I can't remember the name of this character on the big flying birdie, but that is the general. And up in the sky I've got the Long Strikes, Bastion, and the Concussors again. I still haven't cast the Purple Sun yet, so we'll see if that comes up in this game. My opponent has some endless spells as well. There is the Geminids, I think. I'm not sure what that one is actually. So, turn 1. I choose to take my opponent's land, which means I have to get this piece of terrain and kill the unit that was next to it to get rid of their control. And there you go, I drop down right in the middle, start shooting things. I want to attack early in this game, because there's so much shooting, I just want to alpha strike them, make a couple of 9-inch charges in the first round. If I give myself 4 9-inch charges with different units, potentially, maybe 3, because I've got Bastion, I've got the Concussors and the Stardrake. All of them want to get into combat. That means that with a reroll, I've got 4 9-inch charges there. If just one of them gets in, that can be really significant at shutting down the enemy shooting. And I would hope, maybe to get 2 of them in. However, as you can see, none of them make the 9-inch charges, and Bastion takes the brunt of the shooting on the enemy turn, so he's down to 2 wounds. And sad times for Bastion and pals. So the way Wildwoods work now is quite interesting as well. If you're wholly within it, you just can't be seen, apparently. But you can see out, which is quite interesting. And you can see that I actually didn't want to do too much shooting in this turn. I was happy to shoot this unit, so I could hold the objective and score some points, which I did. But I didn't want to shoot this big mass, because all I'd be doing is taking away a model, and my opponent would obviously pick the closest one and make the charges more unlikely. So I didn't want to shoot this big blob here, which contains like cavalry, and there's like a command group in there as well, which buff nearby units. So very scary. Big unit of 20 Fusiliers is obviously scary. There's a wizard back there as well. My opponent goes for Slay the Entourage to pick a unit in the enemy general's regiment, which is going to be Bastion because he's already had loads of wounds taken off him. And putting out buffs +1 save onto these Cavaliers, which is quite powerful. And Bastion, as you can see, I managed to heal a couple of wounds on him because I use a rally command, which now, instead of bringing back models automatically on a 6, you just roll 6 dice, and on every 4+ returns a wound to the unit. So it's good for heroes. It's kind of replaced heroic recovery in that way. It's combining heroic recovery and the old rally, because if you roll enough returning wounds to bring a model back to a unit, then you can. So if my unit of concussors lost a model and didn't have any other wounds on it, and I rolled 5 4+ out of 6 dice, I would gain another one. So you probably wouldn't use it on that unit in that situation because command points are at a premium in this edition, but I've got Bastion back to 4 wounds. I was hoping it would be slightly more than that. Maybe 1 extra would have been nice to hopefully keep him alive for the turn and fail a battle tactic. You can see that my opponent is sneaking around the back, going after these vanquishers, and moving out ready to lay out some dangerous charges. And now if you don't charge both of these units, then obviously one of them is going to be able to countercharge into you, and then I have lots of ways to potentially strike first, so that can be quite scary. So you'll see that Bastion does get killed from all the shooting, which is obviously very sad, but it also means that he's drawn a ton of fire from the enemy, so nothing else has really been shot at yet particularly. There's a little bit left over at the end to shoot at the concussors, and they're knocked down by 1 model. The Cavaliers then go into the Stardrake, who is going to be able to strike first and maybe eat 3 of them before it even fights. And the command group go into the concussors. The Stardrake does go first and eats a couple of the Cavaliers, and I use the Quicksilver to strike first on top of that as well and do some more damage. And you can see it whittled them down to 5, which is pretty good. The concussors, however, get totally whooped by this little puny command group, which apparently are really good at fighting, which is quite surprising. You would think that a unit like that would just be good for buffing the nearby friendly units, but actually they're pretty good at fighting. I think it's is it a Warcry warband as well? So I do kill a little bit in retaliation, but not much. However, important thing to remember about the concussors, as soon as the last one dies, suddenly I can bring 2 back in the next turn for 1 command point. I can only do it once, but it is something to consider. Stardrake has a few more wounds taken off it, but not a great deal. And my opponent actually scores less than me because I was holding a lot of the objectives this turn. So I get first crack at round 2, and I go for Seize the Centre, because I'm planning to murder all the units in the middle, so I need to have 2 units in the centre of the table who are not in combat. So, the Vanquishers are going to come in and charge this unit and finish off them, and then the Stardrake and the Long Strikes are going to finish off this unit here, and that'll be a battle tactic. So let's see if that works out. Here we go. You can see the Vanquishers have got into combat there with the successful charge. The Lord Veritant is moving up into the middle a bit, and if you see a dice next to him, that's how many prayer chanting points he has built up, so that then you can cash them in to use the prayers in the next turn. So he's got 6 at the moment, and I'm bringing him closer so that maybe he can translocate a unit soon. Now, in this turn, we do actually forget about the underdog mechanic, so I forget to remove one of the objectives at the end of my turn here. Oh, actually, I'm not the underdog, so my opponent forgets to remove one of the objectives, because he's currently the underdog, because I'm currently in the lead. So you can see that somehow 5 Vanquishers fail to kill like 3 of these puny Cities of Sigmar guys, which is hilarious, and then the Stardrake completely fails this turn as well, and there's still 3 Cavaliers left. So frankly, an outrageous turn of events, meaning that I fail the battle tactic and only score for the objectives this turn. The Concussor held its own though and killed a few of that little command group and survived, which is nice. My opponent then goes for Take Their Land on this piece of terrain, so is obviously confident that the Stardrake is going to get killed. It's only got 4 wounds left. And this flyer hops onto the objective there. I all-out defense the Star Drake in an attempt to keep it alive, and it's reduced to 2 wounds, which may have been from shooting, and then it dies eventually. Then in combat, somehow these guys are holding their own against my 2 units here, which is hilarious. Now, important to remember that the long strikes can retreat and shoot, but you'll see here that they've been heavily whittled down, so retreating in this instance might not be a good idea. Now, here's when we see a very sneaky maneuver coming up. So, I'm down to 1 long strike, and I'm down to a concussor with 1 wound. If I retreat from combat in this edition, I take D3 mortal damage, and just automatically die, because you can see I've only got one wound left. But if the concussor dies, that means I can bring back a fresh unit of 2 anywhere on the table, 9 inches from the enemy, which seems like a pretty good idea right about now, rather than just having 1 guy left on a wound on an objective I'm not even holding. So we're going to see that in play in a moment. You can see these Cavaliers have whittled down the long strikes heavily now as well. So I do try and keep the concussor alive, because I think there might have been a command point about to vanish. Yeah, because we're about to reach the end of turn 2, so you might as well use it for something. So there's 1 long strike and 1 vanquisher left in the centre, and the combats are not going as planned, which is very sad. So I am now the underdog. Who's going to go first in the next round? It's me. So I go for slay the entourage, and I'm going to try and slay the enemy general, who is all the way up there. So here's my devious plan. The concussors, I retreat this guy out of combat, die, and then resurrect a unit of 2 over here, make a 9-inch charge into the enemy general, kill it, and pick up a battle tactic. That's the plan. Is it genius? Let's find out. Yes, so the enemy general is dead, and I'm now on this objective. So I'm going to score some points, which is okay. But you'll see that my opponent has actually destroyed this objective. So maybe didn't forget about the mechanic, which I mentioned earlier. So I've definitely forgotten about it now, because otherwise I would have just deleted that one. So yeah, I think I just did forget that was a thing I could do. My opponent is now spilling out onto the objectives with 1,000,000 bodies, and there's not a lot I can do about it. I don't have enough left, so I can't stop my opponent scoring anymore. Into the next round, and Lord Veritant gets killed. He gets shot down. And I'm just moving my units to try and score battle tactics now, and keep them out of harm's way. So I can only score a tiny amount in my turn here, because I've only got this objective, which is sad. And as you can see, I've been forgetting to delete the objectives, which is hilarious and sad at the same time. My opponent needs 2 units in combat, and none of them get destroyed, and some of them go into combat with the Purple Sun, which I did cast, and the Knight Incanter, and obviously they're not going to die to that. So there's a tactic, there's 1,000,000 points. Round 5, I just pick up 2 points for this objective again. There's not much I can do now with just a single unit, and my opponent keeps scoring big at the end of the game. So it started off well and then tapered off towards the end. I did remember to delete an objective or 2 towards the end of the game, but we didn't actually remove the marker for it because there was loads of guys stood on it, so we just remembered that it was gone. But there was a point I did forget the underdog mechanic in this mission where I could have taken out one of the objectives sooner. So, what went wrong? Well, I went big in the first round, and it was a big gamble, because if I failed all my charges, which I did, then I was there to be shot and charged by everything. I feel like it was a big turn when I didn't kill this crummy little unit of peasants, basically, here, when my vanquishers went into them, and the Star Drake also did pretty poorly that round, so I failed the battle tactic and failed to kill 2 important enemy units. So all my units were still locked up in combat as a result of that. And the concussors somehow met their match in this little Warcry warband, who is less than half their points, and they just got totally whooped. They kind of made up for it by killing the enemy general and got me some points there. But that's 500-point unit, those concussors. They should be kicking the butts of something that's like 180 points or whatever it is. So very sad. On to the next game. And it is, despite everything looking really huge and terrifying, this is Gloomspite Gits. And there aren't a lot of goblins in there. There are 5 Spider Riders, 2 units. There is Kragnos, there are several troll units, and there is a big troll as well. A big Troggoth, troll guts, whatever they're called, whatever that specific one is called. And the scenario is, let me check my cards here. It could well be the better part of Valor, this one. So it might be. The objective looks like they're laid out correctly for that. So the scoring is pretty standard in this one, whichever one it is. So actually, you know, that's a lie. It's not that one. I've just remembered exactly which one it is. Let's see if I've got the card so I can read it out to you. It is the one where each side has a primary objective. Okay, yeah, so it's close to the chest, this one. I've just found the card here. So, when it's your opponent's turn, you will pick one of your objectives to be the primary objective. And that means that if they hold that one, then they score some extra points. And obviously you want to pick the one they're not going to get. And the underdog mechanic is that you roll a dice, and on a 5+ you can make them pick a different objective to be the primary objective. So, speed is good here because the most valuable objective could be in a different place to the spot you're in. And the ability to get between objectives is quite important. Kragnos is fast. He can make 3d6 charges, he can make friendly units do 3d6 charges around him. He does mortal wounds on the charge. He's just really scary, massively expensive creature, who I would very much like to avoid and kill other things instead. Trolls can come back to life from the Loon Shrine, as can the spiders at half strength. The rock, are they called rock gut Troggoths now? The stone trolls? There's 3 units of them. And the one there is in the General's Regiment, which could be important for battle tactic purposes. So I've got my Concussors, Long Strikes and Bastion off the table again. So this is my standard setup in the first 3 games. I do vary it a bit for a very specific reason on day 2, which you'll see shortly. So, in this game, I haven't remembered to mention this up to now, but the General's Handbook rules for this season, the first season of 4th edition, your General's Regiment, you can dish out some buffs to those units. So, priority target. Pick a friendly unit in your General's Regiment that is not your General to be the Honour Guard, and then add 1 to hit and wound rolls for attacks made by the Honour Guard that target any units in the enemy General's Regiment. So that would include whoever is the General and those trolls there. So I'm pretty sure Kragnos is the General. Kragnos has got to be a War Master, hasn't he? And War Masters have to be the General. So I've put my Knight Incanter at the front to do some unbinding. And my opponent insisted, well, didn't quite insist, but was quite happy to pose with the table in front of Kragnos and all the trolls. There you go, some thumbs up action. So you can see that I've gone first, and I've gone for a little bit of an alpha strike, but not a full-on alpha strike. Kind of surrounding on multiple fronts. Because Kragnos is there, I don't want to compact my army too close together, because if he goes one way and all my stuff is there, he's going to kill all of it probably. So I want him to choose a direction, and I've only committed half my resources on each side. So on this side we've got the Stardrake, who is the furthest away from Kragnos because he gets bonuses against monsters, because he's just a big horrible monster killer. So we don't want to be near him. And the Concussors are there. I've cast a purple sun into the middle of the table to maybe block off Kragnos from coming this way. And I've put my long strikes over there to just start shooting away at this big Troggoth. I've also put Bastion in there in case anyone wants to charge over here. And I actually put loads of wounds onto this guy. And I score 6 points for the round because I do take the enemy land, but I don't hold that many objectives. I hold these objectives. So you have to get the primary, and this one was made the primary objective, so I'm definitely not getting that while Kragnos is standing right there. So I'm accepting I'm never going to score the maximum in this game, probably, because Kragnos is too much of a threat, and whatever he's near, I don't want to be contesting that objective. So, drop down, quite happy to just take their land, and there we go, into the opposing turn. You can see that this big troll, who has taken loads of wounds, is now moving away a bit, And my opponent goes for Do Not Waver, which is 2 or more friendly units fight and no units were destroyed. No friendly units. So the trolls are going to try and get into combat. And you can see that the Lord Veritant is counteracting spells, as is the Knight Incanter. Because there's another big troll shaman at the back there. A Troggoth spellcaster. I can't remember the names specifically of all these units. They gave them such silly names when everyone knows they're just trolls, aren't they? So you saw some. Look at that human hand extender action there. So my opponent is then shooting at the purple sun, trying to kill it, and then sending some trolls into combat with it. And look at this. So the concussors make a daring countercharge. So let's look at the wide shot and see where they were. They were over here. The enemy are not advancing on me. So the concussors decide they're going to make a long countercharge at the enemy in the opposing turn, because if I roll a 3 up, they get to strike first. Tom hates all the copyrightable name changes. Well, at least if you're playing Old World, they're just called trolls. So they're obviously not that bothered about copyright. Or they're not that bothered about Old World, one or the other. So you can see that the concussors did get into combat, but I don't think I got strike first off there, unfortunately. And one of them gets killed, but they do kill a troll in retaliation, so it didn't go as well as expected there. I was hoping to just wipe out that unit with them. Because, you see, the trolls had put themselves out of charge range, but this endless spell was not out of charge range, so I was able to charge the spell and then pile in. And everyone's got a 3-inch combat range now, which is much simpler, so I was able to attack the trolls, but unfortunately wasn't able to do much in combat. So that has kind of worked. I got where I wanted, but the dice rolls didn't go the way I wanted, so I didn't get the trolls murdered. Purple Sun gets killed, and had I been able to kill this troll unit, that would have failed the enemy battle tactic, because they needed none of their units to die this turn. So that could have been a big deal. So 6 each in the round. I get the first crack at round 2, so I go for the same battle tactic, which is 2 units fight and none of mine are destroyed. Bastion gets to this objective, and the long strikes are moving up behind him and doing some blasting, killing some trolls in the middle, whittling that unit down to 1, and putting some more wounds onto this one as well, which is hiding behind Kragnos. And then the Stardrake steams in and helps out in the combat here. All the spiders are killed, and the trolls. So that's a nice turnaround on this flank. The hero is still there, the big troll spellcaster at the back, and the endless spell is still there. You can see the Knight Incanter. I teleported her with the Lord Veritant up into the corner. And yeah, there we go. So we're definitely going to have to face Kragnos next turn. There's no avoiding him for another go. The reason that I've put the Knight Incanter up there is so that obviously she's in range to unbind. I think she may still have her auto unbind left at this point. But also there are battle tactics that can be scored by having units on the flanks, for instance, or being in table quarters away from the enemy. So just teleporting her over there means she can still do her job. And she was only guarding one of these objectives anyway. So if the enemy get onto them, she's not going to do enough on her own to stop them regardless. I'm only guarding this one with the Vanquishers because it means that the enemy are going to struggle to just come and take it by putting a toe on it. They have to actually commit to come and kill the unit, maybe. And I usually make this one the primary, because obviously the enemy is so far away. So I score big points in that round, so that's good. And into my opponent's turn. So we then find out I didn't actually score 10. So it's actually 8, because I don't hold the primary objective. So I make this one the primary. I decide that actually no one's going to reach this because I don't have units on it. Those trolls could theoretically reach the Vanquishers this turn, because they could move forward and then Kragnos could come into range and give them a 3d6 charge ability, which means they could potentially end up here. So I make this one the primary because they can't get that far. They would have to charge, and they can't charge over there because there are no enemies there to charge. An upside down picture there, but my opponent goes for attack on 2 fronts, which is take 2 objectives that don't belong to you, and one of them was in your opponent's hands. The Lord Veritant chants some prayer points in the opposing turn. Kragnos is heading over for the Stardrake, which is obviously the juiciest meal. The Star Drake redeploys a little bit away from him, but doesn't roll very high. I think maybe like just 3 inches or so, so it's still definitely within charge range of the big Cragster. And let's see, the Kragnos does get into combat, so that's going to be very dangerous. And the spellcasting troll does go in as well. Star Drake takes some mortal wounds, which is a very luckily low amount, because the way Kragnos' mortal wounds on the charge work against a monster, he rolls 2d6 and multiplies them together. Unless it's a 7, in which case you don't do any damage. So it's quite likely to be a 7, but it's definitely not guaranteed. And it was just a 1 and a 4, so he takes 4 wounds. That's very lucky. If you roll a 6 and a 6, then obviously that's more than enough to kill a Star Drake. So thankfully Kragnos did not do that. And you can see, because the Star Drake was able to strike first, I'm able to put some wounds onto Kragnos first, which is decent, but then everything dies, because he's just an absolute combat monster, this guy. And those are my failed armor saves. So I think I needed to make some of those saves to keep one of my units alive, and I think I was on a 5+, and just couldn't get any. Everybody's dead, but I can now bring back 2 concussors, so that's a small mercy. You can see these trolls have towed onto this objective, but not on the primary, which is important. However, I have lost some big, important pieces of my army. On the plus side, Kragnos is all the way in the corner. So, after 2 rounds, we're levels. There's no underdog yet. I get to go first in the next round, and I go for Reclaim the Realms, which is have a friendly unit 6 inches from all enemy units. So, if we look at the way the battlefield is positioned here, you might think this is a risk, because the Knight Incantor is relying on scoring it over there. And Kragnos is there, who could just charge her. And I decide that the risk of Kragnos charging me is fine, because that means that to deny me a battle tactic, Kragnos takes himself completely out of the game by being up there in the corner. And I would be more than happy if Kragnos spends a turn up here, and then has to spend multiple turns coming down to chase me. So if Kragnos wants to deny my battle tactic by going after the Knight Incantor, I can live with that. I've already got the Long Strikes in this quarter, the Vanquishers in this quarter, and the Lord Veritant in this quarter, who can move away from the Trolls so that they can't countercharge into me. So it should be an easy score. Bastion can then go out on his own and kill some stuff. So he goes in and kills all the Spider Riders, and the Long Strikes shoot off the last Troll. Or the other way around. I bring in my Concussors over here to counteract those Trolls there, who redeploy out of range of my shooting, so I can't shoot them then. And Veritant makes his way over to this table section. And Kragnos decides not to countercharge into the Knight Incantor, because it's not a guaranteed charge at that distance. I think it's about 12 inches. So even on 3 dice, that's not a guarantee, and you're spending 2 command points for that. And even if you do make it, you've got Kragnos in the corner of the table, which is not great. So, in my turn, I managed to score 6, because I'm not holding... Let's see. So I've got my battle tactic. I'm holding at least 1 objective. I'm not holding more objectives though, because my opponent still holds this one. So that is why they actually redeployed, not just to get out range of shooting, because I drop down these 2. If I charge into the Trolls, I take this objective off them. Which means that I would then have more as well, so I would score more points. So what I should have done, and what I was thinking about doing, but I miscounted the objectives and miscalculated, is that the Lord Veritant should have stayed here. I should have brought these guys down, so that then when they redeploy to get away from my charge, the Lord Veritant then owns this objective. Which means that I would own 3, and my opponent would own 2. So instead I've gone for this one, which means I own 3 and my opponent owns 3 because I failed my charge because they redeployed away. So if I had left the Lord Veritant there, my opponent wouldn't have been able to redeploy because that would have just given me the objective. So the Concussors might have made their charge and killed the Trolls, so I would have taken it anyway. So maybe they still would have redeployed to avoid dying and just accept that I have the objective. So slight miscalculation on my part there, cost me a couple of points. And my opponent in the next round goes for Slay the Entourage and wants to kill Bastion. That's not very nice. And The big Trog and some little Trogs as well are going to try and kill him, which isn't very friendly. Kragnos is going after the Lord Veritant, who is on that objective. I think he had to run, actually, to tow on that objective, so he's just taking it off me for now. I've put the primary over there, because it was the furthest away from Kragnos. And, let's see, I've done some counter-shooting with the long strikes, and they kill one of the trolls and wound another, which is really good. The big Jaws go after the Knight Incanter, the Endless Spell. And we're into combat with Bastion, who all out defences. Let's see if that's enough to save him. He kills the massive Trog, which is great. You can see the spellcasting one there as well. And as a result of that, Bastion seems to be alive. There we go, end of the turn. My opponent only scores 4. Failed battle tactic. Bastion lives, and because he killed a model, he heals 4 wounds as well. So, great work from Bastion. It's still looking a bit dicey because Kragnos is still in the game. And I go first in the next round, which means I'm able to obliterate a lot of this troll unit. There's only 1 left. The concussors move on to this objective, staying as far away from Kragnos as possible. And the Lord Veritant just runs away from Kragnos, I think. And Kragnos redeploys to get closer to me for next turn. I've also moved the Vanquishers a bit, so they're on this objective still, but as far away from Kragnos as possible, because he's the big threat right now. So I've killed almost everything. They can start coming back from the Loon Shrine, but that's really far away from where the action is. And obviously Kragnos is significant, so when I say almost everything, numerically, number of units I've killed a lot, but not in terms of points. So, my opponent wants to take my land, which is this piece of terrain here, which should be easy enough, because they want to charge in and take these objectives anyway. The Lord Veritant, you can see, is behind the long strikes now, with his prayer points. Kragnos is coming in for the concussors. Bastion kills the last troll, or I shoot the last troll down. Kragnos is in, but it's only his base at the moment. Model got left behind temporarily, and the trolls get in, so those concussors are not long for this world. One of them gets killed initially, and then of course the other. So, my opponent does score some good points there for taking my land and scoring lots of objectives, so I now need to start getting onto some other objectives as well. So there he is back on his base. So I get the first crack at round 5, because round 4 you can see I only scored 2 points. So, let's see, what battle tactic did I fail in round 4? Oh yeah, there we go, it was slay the entourage. So I was trying to kill that single troll there, I think, that Bastion was fighting. And I didn't kill it until my opponent's turn, I think. So I think that was the issue. That's why I failed it. So, into turn 5, and the Vanquishers decide there is theoretically a way we can keep Kragnos off this objective in the last turn. If we form a line like this, he would then have to charge us. He can't fit his base around there. He can't fit his base all around the other way. So you would have to have a command point ready to kill them, and then power through, I think it's called, to get onto the objective. So, making your opponent spend more resources. You can also see that Bastion gets down there to fight Kragnos as well, because I want to try and slow him down. Long strikes shooting at trolls that have just emerged from the Loon Shrine. Bastion is fighting this troll right here. And I only scored 2 again, because I fail whichever tactic it was. I don't remember if there was physically one I could do in this turn with the positioning of my units, so that's unfortunate. And then Bastion gets killed, as you can see. And not scoring a lot of points at the end, so I make this the primary in the hope that my opponent can't take it. And he just goes for seize the centre and ignores the primary objective, which is probably a good idea. And survives the counter shooting. So if I'd killed this unit here, then it would have failed the battle tactic, because you need 2 units there not in combat. But the counter shooting doesn't do enough, and my opponent is able to pick up enough points in the last couple of turns to win. So, it was all about Kragnos, really. And I made a couple of miscalculations that cost me points as well. And I could have positioned a couple of things better. But overall, my target priority I think was okay. I killed a lot of stuff. I wasn't planning to kill Kragnos, I was just hoping to kill everything else. I wanted to just avoid him, which is why I split my army up and then was hoping he would end up in the corner, but he didn't fall for that bait. So he's just very powerful, and I'm thinking next time maybe just fire everything into him instead first, because he's such a horrible threat. Kill him, he's not coming back to life. He doesn't have great healing ability either, so could be worth just going all in on trying to kill the Cragster. It's not that easy though, because he's rarely going to be the closest unit for covering fire, and he's probably going to have screens around him, so you can't just drop in and make 9-inch charges into him. On to the next battle plan, which is the Vice. We're on day 2 now. So, the objectives start on the outer corners of the battlefield. At the start of round 2, they move in. They stay there for rounds 2 and 3, and then rounds 4 and 5, there's only one objective, which is in the centre. So, what am I up against here? Look at this, it is the Cruel Boys, the cruelest of all the boys. So, if we look at the wide shot, there's a lot of them. They can do dirty tricks, so they can do things like teleporting units and giving venom-encrusted weapons to units, which makes them do better mortal wounds. Some of the sludge crawlers and sludge rakers and marsh swampers, and you get the idea. They all have grisly, horrible names like that. They give out buffs to their mortal wound output in combat as well. Even the Hobgrots, because they're quite dangerous in combat. So I've got the Knight Incanter there, purely to unbind spells, that's why she's so far forward. I've got the Vanquishers and the Lord Veritant out on the objectives, because the objectives start in the corners, which is why my opponent also has units there. Why is the Star Drake not on the table, you may ask? And why is Bastion on the table? Well, first of all, Bastion's in cover, so it's -1 to shoot him. Star Drake is not on the table because there are 2 Killbows that were deploying after I would have to put the Star Drake down, and Killbows do a huge amount of damage to monsters. So I don't want the Star Drake to be eating shots from them. Killbow Baggins. 2 of them. So, not only is there 2 Killbows, there's also a load of Gut Rippers. There are lots of Hobgrots, a unit of 20, 2 units of 10. There's the Scumdrek, which I think is this one, and that's a normal Sludge Raker there. And there's a Shaman, and there is the Trogboss as well. So, my opponent is going first, and is choosing Seize the Centre, which means 2 units in the middle, and it's like these 2 units are just designed for that battle tactic, because you can put them within 12 of the middle, and the enemy, unless they've got a really long charge ability, are probably not going to be able to charge in and stop you doing that. So they get to the centre, and they score the battle tactic, move on to the objectives, and at this point I realise... Actually, no. Well, they do move on to the objectives, but these objectives aren't active yet. So they are moving on to them with the next turn in mind. And the reason that's important to be on them, because you might be thinking, well, when it's your turn, you can just move on to them. In the next turn, when these objectives are active and the corner ones are not, if you're standing on them and your opponent gets the first crack at round 2, that means that they're not going to score more objectives than you, even if they get the 2 on their side. I think I've explained that correctly. So 8 points scored for my opponent, and onto my turn. I go for attack on 2 fronts, which is hold 2 objectives, one of which was held by the enemy at the start of the turn. So what am I thinking here? Because I would have to then... Let's see. Okay, so I think what I was thinking when I took that picture was that this was active, and it wasn't. So I think I actually change that battle tactic in a minute, because I don't think that one is physically possible. Or, okay, I've just remembered what happened here. So I decide that let's find it again. So I decide that attack on 2 fronts is not going to be possible for me to do during the game because of this battle plan. Because, let me go to a wide shot. The objectives that are now active are these 4. There is 0 chance of me taking objectives off the enemy right now, because there's so much stuff around and so many bodies on them. By the time I've killed enough stuff, the objectives are going to have moved to only 1 objective here. So, you can't do the battle tactic when there's only 1 objective on the table. So I'm never going to be able to achieve that one. So I'm getting rid of it now because there's none that I feel like I can do right now. And the ones that I could do, such as they involve getting units into combat, and I'm not prepared to do that yet because the enemy is very scary and they haven't spread out yet. So I would be giving away units to score 4 points for a turn and then probably get horribly murdered. So I'm going to choose to go behind in the scores and then catch up later. So I cast a Purple Sun, which is just going to try and give me another body and cause some hassle to the enemy. You can see that these bits of terrain are places of power, by the way, which you can try and generate +1 to your casting. But if you roll a 1 on a dice, then it does a wound to you. So you can see that she did take a wound trying to do that. Bastion has all-out defense because he gets shot at by a killbow. Actually, the killbow killed the Lord Veritant, who did all-out defense. So the killbow just kills something on my turn, which is very sad. But I score 4 points because I auto-fail the battle tactic because I just couldn't do it this turn, so I didn't even try. And I'm just keeping units in reserve. And I'm thinking the enemy will move. But actually, if I'd read the mission correctly, then I don't think the enemy will have to move that much just yet. And the mistake I've made here is that I have not put anything onto these objectives yet. So that means that my opponent, who's going to get the next turn, because I'm going to have to give it away, means that they don't have to move because I'm not on objectives. They can just score the maximum. So I'd say the mistake is not putting models onto these objectives. I was too terrified of moving off the cover with Bastion because I don't want to get shot by killbows. And if the Vanquishers are that close, they're more likely to be charged by something. And the killbow's there, which is scary to anybody. So I haven't brought anything in yet. My opponent wants to take my land with this piece of terrain here, which is going to be easy to complete. And the middle objective is not active yet, but there is a unit on it. Add some shooting dished out. Not much is done. The Knight Incanter doesn't take wounds from shooting. Well, she can do, theoretically, but she doesn't on this occasion. And my opponent scores good points again. I go for Do Not Waver, so 2 units fight and none of them are destroyed. So I decide it's time, I'm going to have to throw everything in. So the Star Drake comes down. The Gut Rippers redeploy further away. The Concussors and Bastion come down. No, Bastion was already up, he just moves forward. And they fail their charges. However, hold on, let me see which unit was there. So there was the Killbow. So what happened was, there's a unit here that is equally far away as the Killbow, the unit of Hobgrot Slitters that are behind this building. So I was safe to shoot down the Killbow and kill it because I've still got a charge that's equally far away there. So don't think I've just denied myself a battle tactic by killing the Killbow. But I kill both of them. The Star Drake shoots down the other one, the Concussors and Bastion shoot down this one. And then I try to make charges here and charges here, but I fail all my charges, so I failed the battle tactic on that basis. So I felt it was time to go big, and I have moved on to the objectives now, so I'm learning my lesson. But I only score 4 points, so there's a bit of a deficit, and my opponent is going first in round 3, and chooses the same one I chose, which is 2 units in combat, and none of them are destroyed, or no friendly units are destroyed. So, the Sludge Raker and the Gut Rippers are going after the Star Drake. The Hobgrots are coming this way, which is really dangerous actually, because if I shoot them down, that denies the battle tactic. And the Trog Boss is hanging out on this objective here, not wanting to get too close to the Concussors. The Long Strikes shoot down most of the Hobgrots, and my Concussors make a nice counter charge into the Trog Boss, so if they can kill him, that denies the battle tactic. And they will get to potentially strike first and shut down commands on it as well, but they do lose 1 in the ensuing brawl. However, you'll see that my opponent does not complete the battle tactic because he failed all his charges, and only the Concussors made 1. Because the Star Drake redeployed further away. So redeploying is very strong in this edition for shutting down that specific battle tactic where you have to have multiple units who make it into combat. So if you're not able to position yourself in charge range of 2 enemy units, they can redeploy the one that you're trying to get. And if they roll well, it just becomes very difficult to complete. On top of the other parameters that you have to not have any of your units die, so you can see how close this unit came to auto-failing it regardless. So the battle tactics are definitely more difficult now. So I'm feeling much better about the game after that turn, and in my turn I go for Slay the Tyrant, so kill an enemy hero, because I'm pretty sure I'm going to kill the Trog Boss with the Concussors this turn. And the Long Strikes and the Vanquishers and the Star Drake have set up a little formation, defensive wall here, and shoot down the Sludge Raker. I finish off the last two of the Hobgrots because I think the Purple Sun moves over them and then moves back again, so it kills them. And Bastion joins in with the Concussors and they kill the Trog Boss. So someone tell me if that Purple Sun move is legal, because on its war scroll it states that you can do a move and enemy units that you move over take mortal wounds. So I went boop, touched them, and then moved back again. And they ended up dying as a result of the mortal wounds. So if anyone sees a problem with that, let me know. So you can see that the special character, whose name I've just forgotten, Scumdrek, there it is. He's up there with the Hobgrots and the Shaman, and the Gut Rippers are here. They're facing off against Bastion and the Concussors. And I've scored some big points, so I'm catching up. So, if I get the next turn, I wouldn't be able to score a battle tactic if I take the double. But if I do take the double, there's a good chance I can wipe out some stuff. The Star Drake and the Long Strikes between them can do some serious damage to that unit. Bastion and the Concussors could certainly kill Scumdrek. So I think I would take the double if I get the chance, even though I'm behind on points. However, my opponent gets the next turn and goes for Slay the Entourage on Bastion. So I counter cast a spell, Starfall, onto the Gut Rippers to give them -1 charge dice, which is quite a big deal because they're so far away. And on that basis they decide they're just going to move around and get onto the one active objective this turn. And yeah, so that is very sad, because if the Lord Veritant was still alive, I could have counter-prayed and teleported him onto that objective, because to score maximum in the final 2 rounds of this battle plan, there has to be no enemy units anywhere near the centre. So, Scumdrek and the Hobgrots are going to have a chance to try and kill Bastion and pals now. The Bastion has all out defensed. And they all get into combat. And Bastion is killed, so very sad. And the Concussors are all killed. So I'm going to be able to bring back 2 of them, obviously, but my opponent scores big, and it's looking a bit bleak again suddenly, so I need a big round now. So I go for Take Their Land, pick an enemy terrain feature, which I pick this one here, which is near the centre where I want to be anyway. And the Star Drake and the Vanquishers go into the Gut Rippers. The Purple Sun has a 3-inch charge to join in the combat and rolls a double 1. And because you can't give commands to manifestations, then I can't re-roll the charge for the Purple Sun. Which means that because the rest of the units didn't kill enough stuff, I fail to take the centre off the enemy. Which means I'm not going to score much. I do hold this terrain feature because I've got the Star Drake there, so I'm going to score a bit. But the Purple Sun failing its charge and then everyone else not doing very well in combat is quite a big deal there. I do bring down 2 Concussors as well, who also fail their charge. But the Purple Sun is the big one, because that would have been enough to give me the objective, because it would have killed at least 1 more guy. So I only score 4 points for the battle tactic, which is hilariously sad. So I think I've just lost the game at this point already. So I have to give away the turn to my opponent, and hope that they don't score anything at all to give me a chance now. Because I do win the roll-off for round 5, but if I take it, I can't score a battle tactic and thus auto-lose the game. So I give it away, and here we go. You can see Scumdrek is coming in, the Hobgrots are coming in, going for the centre. Now, the Hobgrots don't actually make their charge, so the Concussors are able to then countercharge Scumdrek, who ran to get this close in the first place, I believe. And they just get killed by him, so it didn't make much difference because I failed to get the strike first ability on them, just failed to roll a 3+. And I haven't even killed that unit yet, which is sad. Now my plan was to countercharge with the Star Drake here, because at the start of the game when we were looking at the terrain cards, this was listed as like area terrain, but clearly you can't physically put a model on it. So my understanding of the discussion was that we couldn't stand on it, or that we could stand on it. My opponent's understanding was that we couldn't stand on it, which is why he was kind of snaking around it. So when I said I'm thinking of doing this countercharge here, we then decided, you know what, it makes sense that you can't put your base there. And we just didn't fully understand what the other was saying, I think, at the start of the game with regards to this terrain. Because I would have been happy to just play everything as impassable, because it's hard to fit the base on. But what he meant was that you can put models on the steps, but not this bit, which is obviously impractical. And I understood that to mean you could just put models on the terrain in general, and that we would probably just move it out of the way. So it makes more sense to just make all terrain impassable, unless it's like this, where you can clearly just step on it, in my opinion. It just adds clarity to have nice clear boundaries on the terrain, which is mixed up this edition, because last edition there weren't really clear terrain guidelines, so it was down to Rob at the TSN Arena for the events to put out terrain maps which were clearly defined what the terrain did. And now GW have kind of done that themselves, which clashes a little bit with the terrain that exists at the venue. So I would say probably going forward things like this should just be impassable in general. So my opponent does score some points in the last round, which is enough to win, so I'm going to try and bring it as close as possible by seizing the centre and killing everything. So long strikes, blasting everything away. Knight Incanter, blasting things away. The Star Drake getting into combat. However, the battle tactic is auto-failed because the Hobgrot Slitters use a dirty trick and make the Vanquishers strike last. So why does that fail the battle tactic? Because the Vanquishers have to go first, because that gives space for the Star Drake to pile in and fight the Slitters. As it stands, the Vanquishers have to go last. The Star Drake can only pile into like there, which means that it doesn't have the reach to actually hit the Hobgrots. So that dirty trick from the Cruel Boys denies the tactic. And that's how the game's going to end, so no points in the final round. So in terms of killing things, this game went pretty good, I felt. I killed all the big stuff. There's only one unit of Hobgrots left. He's actually dead. There's the dead piles over there. So in terms of what's left on the table, if we were just fighting to the death, it would definitely be a Stormcast win. But playing the mission wrong, I think, not as in not playing the rules correctly, I mean approaching it incorrectly on my part at the start, where I was sitting back too much when my opponent didn't need to move, and then a couple of errors like not putting units onto the objectives in my own turn so that my opponent had to move forward to score more, which would have then enticed spreading out, which would have helped me with dropping units in to get into favourable combats. So, a crushing loss despite wiping out most of the opposing force, and lunchtime on day 2, so that means all the armies are out on display. So, let's have a look at them. We've got some Night Haunt. Very Night Haunty. We've got some Daughters of Cain with Marathi, who is one of the few units that still has the kind of weird rules from the last edition, where she can't just be killed in one turn, which is interesting, that she manages to retain that. The Kronspine has lost that now. It can kill the Kronspine in one turn. Very nice endless spells there. Then we have got more Stormcast. So, very cool looking Stormcast. Quite grim, I think, between my army and this one. Some of the more grim looking Stormcast we've seen. However, Yndrasta, it turns out, isn't actually part of the army. So, in fact, some of this other stuff isn't as well, I think. Yndrasta and somebody else, I think. Maybe the Griffhounds aren't in the army either. So, I'm going to call shenanigans. No, I'm not really. I think this army did win Best Painted, but it is very nice. Or Coolest Army it should actually be. Not just Best Painted. We've got some evil Slanesh there. Very pink. I always think that face looks very cool. We've got 4 Bloodthirsters, and that's an army. Oh, and there's a priest on there as well. But that's pretty much the army. 5 models, Bloodthirsters. Hilarious. We have got some Soulblight Gravelords, it looks like there, with plenty of wolves. And we have got some Seraphon, some delightfully bright green lizards. We've got some different cruel boys. We have got some Ideneth Deepkin with a giant turtle, very impressive. And we've got some... that looks like some more Nighthaunt. But there's also zombie-looking things in it, so I don't know, it must be Nighthaunt, surely. Last round. Battle for the pass. So, you score victory points. You score 5 victory points if you control the objective wholly within enemy territory, so that's the most important thing. So, those two. So you start over here, you want to score there, that's the big one. You also score 1 point for your own objective and 2 points for each of these. Which means that you could score 5 objective points just for holding the 3 that are easiest. But if you hold this one and another one, then you could cap out at 6. So it's not that big of a deal to not get the enemy's home objective as long as you're controlling these 3. So it's Stormcast versus Stormcast. Grim Stormcast versus Grim Stormcast. So who's on the table at the start? The Stardrake, Vanquishers, the Knight Incanter, they are guarding my back objective because that's obviously valuable. The Lord Veritant is there as well. So I'm spreading out at the back here. I don't want the enemy to land anything there because there's loads of Annihilators in this list. So I'm planning in the first turn to counter, if I go second, I'm going to try and countercast the Purple Sun and drop it around here because then the enemy can't land too close to it. So what does the enemy have? The Lord Imperatant, who can let units move a few inches after they land in from the heavens, which is very powerful. It used to be that he could let 1 unit per turn do a 7-inch charge, but it wasn't very thematic because he would just hide the whole game until he was using his ability, and then once it's been used up, he's then worthless. Now he actually has to be in range of the units he's giving this ability to, so he has to be on the front lines with them, which makes a lot more sense for the Lord Imperatant. Vanquishers and Annihilators starting on the table. I know it's madness, but it's a unit of 3 that are starting there. 3 long strikes, the Lord Relictor and the Lord Arcanum, who gets +1 for casting invocations, such as the Comet. There are 2 units of 6 Shield Annihilators. Shield Annihilators are looking pretty tasty at the moment. They're much cheaper than the Grand Hammers. They do less damage, obviously, but they have a better save. And we'll see how they do. There's the Questor Soulsworn unit, who are a Paladin unit who can teleport once per game. And they can also mark an objective to be... They have a higher control score when they're on it. There's also a Stormstrike Chariot, which does mortal wounds on the charge, which, as I was discussing earlier, anything that does mortal wounds now seems like a bonus because a lot of them have been removed from the game. And in reserve, I've got Bastion, Long Strikes, and the Concussors. So my opponent is going first and wants to get 2 units to fight and to have no friendly units destroyed. A risky one means you have to make some charges. So, the Knight Incanter takes 3 wounds because she tries to countercast the Purple Sun to block up the back area, and I roll a double 1 and then take 3 wounds. So that's quite funny, and it cost me a command point for that privilege as well. So, 3 long strikes are teleported by the Lord Relictor onto this objective, and then they are going to shoot the Stardrake. The Questor... Oh no, these are the Vanquishers. The Vanquishers are guiding the back objective on their own. And no one is brought down from the sky yet, it looks like, until right now. So a unit of 6 Annihilators are dropped in front of my Vanquishers on the objective. 9 inches away. Stardrake takes some wounds to the shooting of the long strikes, only a couple. And I redeploy the Vanquishers to get them further away after the Annihilators and the Questor Soulsworn have landed. You can see the Imperatant there, so he gave them that extra movement to get them even closer. But then I redeployed away, rolled a 5, and managed to make it quite difficult charges. So, then more shooting. So I can't remember what the first shot was that did 2 wounds. It could have been a spell or something. Because the long strikes then do another 8 wounds to the Star Drake, so it's down to 8. So it's quite vulnerable now. So I'm going to have to really get it in there and kill those guys. And I don't know what the picture of those 2 dice is for. Oh, I do. It's my countercharge, I think, because I tried to countercharge into the long strikes with the Star Drake, but I only rolled 8, and I needed 9 to get there. The Soulsworn make it into the Vanquishers and make short work of them, but the Annihilators in the middle fail their charge. So, my opponent does not score a battle tactic that turn, but does hold my home objective, so scores 5 for that, and then +1 for having some other objectives, because it caps at 6 for objective scoring. So, the Vanquishers are dead, Star Drake has lost half its wounds, so what's my plan? I'm going to try and drop something down and take out the Vanquishers and get the enemy home objective over there. I'm going to have to take out the Questor Soulsworn, so they don't just sit here and score loads of points all game. And the Star Drake will have to deal with these long strikes, because I can't let them just shoot me for the whole game. So I'm going to have to go over there and kill them. Probably shoot them first as well, to try and kill 1 or 2 of them, so that their counter shoot is less tempting to do. So I go for attack on 2 fronts, take 2 objectives that I didn't own, at least one of them has to be from the enemy. So this one is going to be easy. Star Drake can just take that one off them. I'm also going to try and take my home objective, because the Knight Incantor actually should be on it right now. She's just been nudged off because there was combat going on, but she should actually be touching the edge. So if I then kill the Soulsworn with shooting, then she'll be able to claim it. And then I want to take this one. I'm also going to bring Bastion down over here and try and take this one off the Lord Imperatant. So, here we go. I bring down the long strikes and start blasting away at the Soulsworn. And the Star Drake is dead. So, the long strikes had the most horrendous round of shooting, and they barely killed any of the Soulsworn. So the Star Drake decided, you know what, I've got 8 wounds left. If the long strikes want to shoot me, they'll be hitting on 4s, because it's -1 for a counter shoot. 7 shots on 4s, they're probably not going to kill me. So I'm going to use my shooting to instead target the Soulsworn, but he kind of fails with his shooting as well, so there's still 3 of them alive. And then the counter shooting actually rolls really well and kills the Star Drake. So, 3 long strikes in 2 goes, 170 point unit. I've killed a 490 point unit. It is the kind of thing they're great at killing because they get +1 rend against heroes. So the Star Drake is dead, and it's looking bleak. The Concussors drop down, and so the Lord Veritant also teleported over there because he was also going to try and teleport into the Vanquishers and charge them, I mean. The Concussors failed the charge, the Veritant made his. Bastion failed his charge. So, the Veritant's in combat. The one unit I didn't care about making it in or not failed, or he made it in, and all the others that I do care about failed, and the Star Drake died, so I failed the battle tactic. And I also don't hold any objectives, because the Star Drake died and he was supposed to be taking 1. My home objective is still held, so I score 0 in the first round. So that's a little bit of a disaster. So in the next round, you can see that I do get the next turn, because Bastion charges into the middle here to go after the Lord Imperatant. The long strikes even shoot the Questor Soulsworn, and then I end up charging into them because they were still alive. So I wanted to just have a chance to do more wounds to them, but there's still 1 left. But I think I've got enough to take the objective off them now, at least. Bastion does some damage to the Imperatant. The Annihilators countercharge into him, but you can see that he actually shoots one of them before he charges in as well. So that means at the end of the turn he will recover any wounds he's taken up to a maximum of 4, because he killed a model during the turn. The Concussors do go into the Vanquishers this time with the Lord Veritant and steal the enemy home objective, so that's good. We've got a very powerful unit sitting on a very important scoring zone now. And I don't do anything to those long strikes, because my long strikes are so preoccupied killing this one unit that will not go down. I've also cast Starfall onto this unit of 6 Annihilators, which means they have -1 charge dice, which meant it would be impossible for them to make a counter charge into me. And also that's going to make it very difficult for them to charge me in the next turn. Or I say very difficult, just way more difficult than it would have been. So I do score 6 points and equalise, but I've now had 2 turns and my opponent's only had 1. So my opponent goes for Slay the Tyrant, kill a hero, and is mostly targeting Bastion. The Relictor teleports himself over here behind the Annihilators. The Soulsworn is killed. So this is an important move, this, because those Annihilators are at -1 charge dice. They could get to within 3 inches and then make a charge on a 3+, which is likely to succeed. However, I do a counter spell with the Night Incanter and do the Lightning Blast spell, which kills off the final Soulsworn, which is really important because it means that the Long Strikes are now able to redeploy when the Annihilators move over here. And any kind of half-decent roll on the redeploy is going to make it a very difficult charge on 1 dice, remember. So those Annihilators are not going to enjoy life on the back of me using a counter spell to kill the final Soulsworn. The Long Strikes teleport over here, and when I say teleport, I think they just run over there actually. But one of them dies because I think I do a counter shooting ability with, let's see, because I'm sure there were 3 of them in the last picture. Yeah, they are. So I think I did a counter fire, covering fire ability with the concussors and killed one of them because I knew they were about to dish out some pain with their bows, except, wait a minute, have I just lied? No, I think he's still there actually. Yeah, he is still there. He's not died. So I'm able to use my redeploy on the Long Strikes because the Soulsworn is dead, and then I do my covering fire here and kill an Annihilator, and obviously they fail their charge. It's only on 1 dice now. So that any spell that you can reduce charge dice is really good. That's a really powerful spell. 18-inch range. I think that's very strong right now. Other factions have access to that ability as well. The Deepkin have a shark, and if it wounds you, I think, with one of its specific attacks, then it puts you on -1 charge dice, which is quite scary. So that is a mechanic that's quite frequent at the moment. The Lord Arcanum and the Chariot are both trying to charge into Bastion, but the Chariot fails its charge, importantly. So Bastion is able to kill the Lord Imperatant. So Bastion lives, which means a failed enemy battle tactic. So only 4 points scored for objectives there for this one and this one, which are held. So it's looking pretty good. There's still a unit of 6 Annihilators up in the sky that haven't dropped down yet, so that's something to be concerned about. And I get the first crack at round 3, so I go for Do Not Waver, which is 2 units in combat and fight, and none of my units were destroyed. So, my Long Strikes, wait a minute, why are there 6 of them, I hear you ask, when there were 4 left? That's because I used Rally on them, and I managed to roll 4 pluses on the 6 dice, so I can bring 2 models back, so they're back up to full strength. I move them from here, I move the Knight Incanter off the objective to get further away from the enemy, and then I start blasting away, and there's only 1 Annihilator left in that unit now, so that's really good. The Concussors go into these Long Strikes and kill one of them. Only 1 though, and you can see I've only got 2 left now from the shooting that they've suffered. The Chariot makes a counter charge into Bastion, which is quite scary, but Bastion does put 6 wounds on it. So, you can see I Finest Houred Bastion this turn. The way Finest Hour works now is Stormcast Eternals, on their turn, they just pick a unit to have Finest Hour, which is +1 to wound, +1 armor save. But you can't use it more than once per game on each unit, so once Bastion's used it once, he can't use it again. And it's only on your own turn. It doesn't roll into the enemy turn, you can't activate it on the enemy turn. Just for your own turn, you get those bonuses, and then you can't do it again with that unit. So, here's what my opponent wanted to do. Charge in, do mortal wounds to Bastion, that's what's happened. 3 wounds have been put on him, he's got 5 left. Mortal wounds. Then do damage to him in combat, and then use the Power Through ability, the Power Through command, to then command the Chariot to do that, which is going to do mortal wounds, and that has an ability where it does extra mortal wounds to do more mortal wounds onto Bastion and then finish him off at the end of combat. So, what is... hold on. Yes, so I'm right in what I'm saying here, but Bastion... It's not a battle tactic because it's on my turn. It was the previous turn they failed to kill Bastion that cost them the battle tactic. In this turn, there's no tactic involved, but this is what the intention is for killing Bastion, to do Power Through at the end, after making a charge. So, how do I deny that? Bastion declares that he's going to put all his attacks into the Chariot, and I believe I use all-out attack. So that means the chariot is now terrified and thinks, I've got 10 wounds. If 3 of those go through, 3 of Bastion's attacks, I'm dead. So I have to all-out defense just to survive, which means I then don't have my final command point to use for power through. So Bastion has to target the chariot. If he doesn't, then my opponent would just hold on to that command point and use it to power through and probably kill Bastion at the end of the turn. But obviously you can't power through if you're dead, and the chariot probably would have been dead if it didn't use all-out defense. So that's how I got rid of that command point, so it wasn't possible. So I do score some good points in that round because I get units in combat and don't die. So yeah, Bastion dying would have cost me the battle tactic, not my opponent a battle tactic if he lives. So obviously you could roll badly with the power through and not kill him anyway, or I could make ward saves, so it's not a guarantee, but it's too risky for my liking, so I just wanted to take that out of the equation. You can see that these long strikes of the enemy are doing really good work because they've killed the concussors. There's only 2 left. So I have now taken the lead, but obviously I've had more turns, and into my opponent's turn 3. Wants to take this bit of land, but because of the restrictions on where you can land, only 9 inches, you have to be 9 inches from the enemy. So these Annihilators can only land here. So to take this piece of terrain, the Annihilators need to make a 9-inch charge into somebody. And because the concussors are probably going to eat the long strikes there. Let's see if they can do it, because as we move on, you'll see that the last Annihilator there was killed with covering fire from the long strikes on the enemy turn, and then Bastion finally goes down in combat against the chariot and the Arcanum, and I think that is the Arcanum, and 2 of the Annihilators. These Annihilators here failed their charge when they drop in. It had to be a 9-inch charge and there were no command points left, because if you recall, on my turn, the last command point had to be used to all-out defense the chariot to stop it dying. So there was no reroll available. But Bastion is dead. However, my opponent is not scoring big here at all, and it's definitely moving in my favour. These Annihilators are now stuck, and I'm going to try and cripple them even more by casting Starfall on them to try and get them -1 dice on their charges. It should also be pointed out that... Which game was it? I think it was in my last game. I may go back and look, but one of the games, someone had a Cron Spine available to them and failed to bring it in for the whole game. But I didn't mention it because obviously there was no photo of it because it was never brought in. Then we've got my turn 4 next, and Reclaim the Realms, so a unit in every table quarter more than 6 inches from the enemy. So this is kind of an auto-complete because I just nudge these 2 units apart so that they're in each quarter. I bring back a unit of Vanquishers, by the way, a unit of 3, because I don't feel like my other units are going to die before the end of the game, so I'm using my command point to bring back a half-strength unit of Vanquishers to get on this objective. I cast Starfall on the Annihilators to put the -1 charge dice, so they're not going to be able to countercharge me. And I put the banner towing onto the objective because he's worth 2 as well. Because I think we measured out that if the Annihilators redeploy and they roll a 6, they could get 1 of them onto the objective, which wouldn't be enough to stop me taking it with this guy. And then the Lord Veritant just ducks into one of the table sections. And so there we go. So I've got 1 unit in each table quarter, because with this one you can use it with units that you've set up, which is nice. The concussors steam into the chariot and try and kill that, but they don't quite manage it yet. And I'm scoring good points now, racking up a lead. And onto my opponent's turn 4, attack on 2 fronts, which is take 2 objectives off your opponent, or take 2 that you don't own, and one of them has to have been controlled by your opponent. See, the Annihilators are just going to try and take this one. However, if I redeploy onto it, then they won't take it, because the banner is worth 2. However, they will take it because in this mission, if you're the underdog, then non-hero units add to their control score and objectives, so they will actually take this. 3 more Annihilators, so my opponent uses the Stormcast ability to bring a unit back at half strength and chooses to bring in 3 Annihilators 9 inches from the Lord Veritant. And he just redeploys away from them so that they don't get to charge him. So they can't take that objective, so I'm still on the enemy's home objective. So my opponent does score, but only 4. So you can see I'm building up a nice lead now. And failing to take the objectives off me is quite a big deal. Next turn, I go for seize the centre and just get the Veritant and the Concussors in there. The Vanquishers have to charge the Annihilators so that these 2 units don't end up in combat at the end of the turn, because that would deny me the battle tactic, so the Vanquishers have to be in combat there, so the Annihilators can't go after me. And as a result of that, I'm able to score big again, and my opponent is able to score a little bit in the last round, but not much, just for these 2 objectives. So, a nice big win for me against the enemy Stormcast, and it started off so badly. The first turn couldn't have gone worse. 0 points, and the Stardrake got killed on the enemy's, or on my turn, with a covering fire from the 3 long strikes, who also killed 2 Concussors. So those long strikes were definitely the enemy MVPs. My MVPs, maybe the Knight Incanter. That's Starfall spell, making an infantry unit -1 charge dice, is incredibly powerful. So very, very cool indeed spell there. And the other spells, there's one that does mortal wounds that doesn't have range on it, which is really rare actually in this edition, that you have abilities that don't have a range. Most things that used to be infinite range now have a range on them. For example, Bastion used to be able to give table-wide commands, and now he can't. He has to give commands to units wholly within 12 to give them away for free, and it has to be all-out attack as well. So having mortal wounds at range is a pretty big deal. And yeah, I'm really enjoying the Stormcast. They seem cool. The Concussors do some sterling work. And yeah, I don't remember what it's called now. The sub-faction. Let's have a look, because they don't use the same sub-factions that they did previously. Let me look what it's actually called. The Lightning Echelon, there you go. So that, if you're taking Dracothian Guard or Stardrakes, then you can, when you charge, you can get Strike First on a 3+ for one of those units, which is really powerful. And the Concussors shutting down commands on a 3+ as well is powerful. That's not a thing that's as common this time, because Roar doesn't exist. Monstrous Rampages are different. Every monster has a unique rampage they can do. Stardrake's really good, can just eat things. And 2 wins, 3 losses. The games were mostly kind of close. The first game was a bit of a annihilation of the enemy. Second game went horribly wrong. This game was fairly close. Obviously with my horrendous first turn, it stayed close until the end, where I kind of ran away with it by racking up big scores late in the game. And yeah, I think the Annihilators, when they drop in, if they don't make that initial charge, they're struggling, because they're not very fast. So yeah, you got to make those charges. So what I'm thinking is, when I run my Annihilator lists, I'm going to have to be very careful. When you're dropping down from the sky, put yourself in range of 2 targets, 9 inches away. Because that way, if they redeploy, then they can only redeploy 1 of them. Unless it's Cities of Sigmar, who might be able to redeploy 2. But in general, if you put yourself going after 2 units that are right next to each other, only 1 of them can redeploy away. And if you're using the Lord Imperatant to get closer, you'll want the units to be next to each other, because you kind of have to commit then which way you're going. And you have to move closer to 1 of them, and then that one could just redeploy. So, redeploy has slightly impacted dropping in from the sky and then charging, because the enemy can just move away from you, so you just have to be more careful with it and make sure you've got multiple targets. Also, knowing that you're going to do that, if you can try and draw out command points from the enemy, get them to spend those points, so maybe even leave something open in the turn for them to spend command points on that they might think is an exciting opportunity, but really it's a trap, so that they don't have points left to redeploy later. Because command points are rare now. You only get 4 per round. If you're the underdog, you get an extra 1. if the enemy has more auxiliary units than you get an extra one per round, which is very strong, so I can't see people taking auxiliary units unless their entire army is like a big comedy list, or they find something that's so powerful that it's worth spamming loads of it and giving away command points anyway. So command points, very hard to come by, which makes Bastion good, because he gets them for free. Knight Incantor, she's disappearing, but she's pretty tasty, with that auto unbind that she still has. When her time comes and the War Scroll explodes, I'm sure she'll turn into a Knight Arcanum, suspiciously, but she'll look exactly the same. And if you're playing that at Warhammer World, and anyone approaches and says, hey, wait a minute, that's not a Knight Arcanum, that's Knight Incantor, say, what's a Knight Incantor? I don't think they exist. So clearly this is a Stormcast Wizard, and a Stormcast Wizard is a Knight Arcanum. So what are they going to do? If they're going to delete it, I'm actually going to do a video at some point that touches on the fact that they've deleted some of the Stormcast units that are... When was 2nd edition? Was it like 2017 or so? Around then? So they're not a decade old yet, some of these units, and they're being removed from the game. Maybe forever, maybe not. I'm certainly not going to be burning my models, because they may well come back. And I would be able to use them. Like the Lord Veritant, there's a new model for him, but I'm just going to keep using my old one. And what I'm thinking is doing some kind of video on how I build my model collection and how my armies aren't disposable. Because there are people, and this isn't a negative at them in any way, people who look through the rules, think that's going to be a cool list or that's going to be a really powerful list, and then they go out and buy that army and paint it and put it on the table. And then as soon as the rules change and it's no good anymore, they stick it on eBay and move on to the next thing that's powerful. That's not really why I'm in the hobby. I just build my army, paint my army, and then try and make a list out of it that's good. And if there's something that's particularly powerful, I might add another one. And I keep that army. I don't get rid of my armies. That army's going to stay with me. Even if the unit's terrible and never sees play in a decade, it's still going to be there in the cabinet waiting for its moment to shine. And if it gets retired and there's something else on the same base size, then that's what it's going to become. Because that's just my army. I think that could be extended into a full, like, scripted video on the way I build my armies and how that isn't conducive with GW retiring units. Okay, any questions before we wrap this one up? Because that is the final shot of the tournament there. The Stormcast reigning supreme against the enemy Stormcast. Very entertaining game. The enemy Stormcast here won the Coolest Army Award. And I'm not going to argue with that. They are very cool indeed, all those Annihilators. I'm going to be trying out some Annihilator lists at some point. I'm going to be trying out Krondis. He seems quite good now. I'm going to try out the Drake Sworn Templar, which is the other Star Drake variant. And that's really good against monsters. I'm going to try out Yndrasta. She's great against monsters, but she's also expensive and fragile. So we'll see how she does. I've also got... Let's cast an eye over to my cabinet. I've got Shield Annihilators, I've got Grandhammer Annihilators, I've got Retributors, I've got Liberators, I've got Judicators who still exist for now, I've got Evocators who still exist for now, I've got Celestar Ballistas who exist for the time being, who will be going away. I've got loads of Foot Heroes, I've got the Lord Relictor, and in the painting station, after I finish these Bretonnian Men-at-Arms, I've got some Questa Soulsworn, and the Knight Vexilor with the banner from Dominion box from the last edition. He's actually good now. He used to be terrible, but he might get painted at some point. Okay, I think it's about time to wrap this one up. So, nice exciting adventure into the world of 4th edition Age of Sigmar. Let me know if you've got any questions on my experiences of this edition and the Stormcast and the armies that I faced. And let me know what you think of this edition. Are you going to be giving it a try? Have any of the changes put you off the game? Have they enticed you in, perhaps? Or are you still on the fence? Are you waiting to see where it lands? Tom says, happy about the Dwarves finally coming out. Yes, the Dwarves for Old World have been announced. The pre-orders are very soon, so my bank account is ready and prepared to unleash all my funds at GW and third-party retailers to get... I've already got an army of Dwarves that's too big to have a field in one game. But I'm still going to be spending hundreds of pounds on new units, who are actually old units, because there are things I just don't have in the army, like Slayers and various war machines. So very excited about that. There was an entire Andy and Rem show earlier this evening where we were looking at the upcoming dwarf releases. For anyone who's into that kind of thing, which hopefully is all of you, because dwarves are the premier old world faction if you ask me. Okay, don't forget to like the video and subscribe if for some reason you haven't already. And don't forget to check out all the links in the description, including the various social media shenanigans. And if you want to keep the non-stop content from various game systems flowing, it's just a torrent of content onto your devices from this channel, then why not pledge your entire life savings to my Patreon or PayPal? Because really, what are you going to spend it on? Are you going to spend it on anything that's better than, let's say, a Dwarf Slayer unit? If you're only going to be buying like lame things like food and rent, then really you have to think twice and consider maybe donating so that I can get some Dwarf Slayers. You have to prioritise in life, and I think that's where people should really be looking. It just makes sense. Okay, on that note, thanks for watching everybody, and all that remains to be said is good night out there, whatever you are.